Okay, so for those of you that are joining us on Facebook, welcome. And my name is Clementine Minnie Bordeaux. On behalf of Racing Magpie and our whole team, I'm really excited to welcome you all here this evening, a part of our winter camp with Jace. And we're privileged to have them share with you tonight. So if you don't know that much about Racing Magpie, it's a Lakota-centric arts and cultural organization here in Rapid City, Mini-Luzaha, Otumahe, here in South Dakota. Racing Magpie centers the Lakota practice of being a good relative in everything that one does. Our work focuses on elevating and amplifying the ongoing work of community-based artists and culture bearers and community. As part of being a good relative, this program, our winter camp, reimagines this Lakota model of problem solving and community building in today's world by examining the deeper cultural roots and the way that Lakota people do things, how we interact with the universe and the world around us. We do these events and they're open to the public. Like I said, we're on Facebook Live right now and we have our Zoom room open. But they always target Lakota community members and those of the larger Oceti Shakoi. And just as the plants and trees focus their energy on building strength and growing from the roots during the winter, our community will join and strengthen and grow together through our sharing and learning. We also want to thank the Bush Foundation for their generous sponsorship of this program. So we're able to provide support to our presenters. And if you want to, support Racing Magpie in your own way, you can visit our website if you'd like to drop off a donation or visit our new space here in Rapid City. And then, of course, you can always support our artists and our creatives by sharing out their materials through social media, downloading their music, buying their gifts, or supporting them directly as artists. If you have questions throughout the Zoom presentation or through Facebook Live, you can drop questions in the chat in the Zoom room, or you can comment on the video, and we'll be sure to monitor all of those platforms so we can connect you with Jace. And we encourage you to keep your cameras on, but if you want to stay off camera, we totally understand. So without further delay, I would like to introduce Ms. Jace DeCory, who is from Cheyenne River. She is part of the larger Oceti Shakoi Lakota communities. She is an assistant professor emerita in American Indian Studies at Black Hills State University in Spearfish, South Dakota. Jace retired in June of 2016 after teaching American Indian Studies classes at BHSU for 33 years. So almost as long as I've been alive. But she taught in the College of Liberal Arts, and Jace continues to give cultural presentations of her interests, which lie in Lakota history, art, philosophy, American Indian women, and cultural change. Jace's guiding forces are her two sons, Junior and Dawson, and her grandchildren. She enjoys beading baby moccasins for relatives and friends, and Jace credits Lakota elders for providing guidance, prayers, and support throughout her life, right? Leading with Madake Oyasin, for all my relations, we are related. So I will turn it over to you, Jace, to get started with your winter camp.
Well, thank you so much, Minnie. And good evening, folks. This presentation comes to you from the ground which is the homeland of the Oceti Shakoi and the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota people, the indigenous people who have the longest relationship to this place. And I'm located in Spearfish in the wonderful Hersapa, the Black Hills, and where I've retired to, and I feel this is a very special sacred place to our people and other tribal peoples as well, and even those Washichus that have come to know and get connected to these lands as well. many other people. So I love this place my spirit calls home. And so that is what I love to stay close to the stories that are associated with our people and with this land-based connection, this connection we have to the land. That is really something that really powers me, and I guess it keeps me grounded, if you will. And we're going to talk about storytelling tonight, and stories, and I don't know if I'll be telling. Maybe I'll talk a little. Maybe I'll tell a short story. But you know, as Lakota people, we come from an oral tradition. From the Lakota word woyake ihani, those long ago stories. We come from that oral tradition that is really has been a strong tradition for us as Lakota people, and many other Native people as well come from that genre, or that place of telling things orally and passing them down from one generation to the next. Stories are very important to us, and in the past, and even today. They can bring hope, they can bring joy, they can make someone laugh, they can teach a lesson. And that's how I've used storytelling in my teaching for over 33 years. I was connected to tribal colleges first, and at Cheyenne River, Standing Rock, and did some consultant work for Oglala Lakota College, and worked at Turtle Mountain Community College in North Dakota. And so that I understand and appreciate the wisdom that those elders have to teach us about stories and oral tradition. I think it's just really an important part of who we are as Indigenous people, that we have so many wonderful storytellers who have taught us throughout the years, and who continue to teach us. And I never did refer to myself as a storyteller, and it's really kind of funny when people say, let's get Jace, that storyteller, to come and talk to our group. And you know, I think of myself as an educator, and I enjoy sharing knowledge and communicating with people in that way. But that was so I guess I'm still embracing the title of storyteller, and I guess I have to talk to one of my aunties that Mary Louise Defender, who is, you know, I think of her as a storyteller. You know, she's been doing that most of her life, 90 some years old, but so I'll try to be that image of a storyteller. But anyway, I use stories to tell, to teach, and to share information, to show examples that helped further explain some of the concepts I was trying to share with my students, and to get a point across. And it seems like those personal stories really help students to connect, and it provided, I think, better relevance for the point that I was trying to get across. And the main reason why I think stories are important is because everyone has a story to tell. Even little children have their stories to tell. And so the main thing is listening to what people have to share. And so the skill of a storyteller, I think the most important skill that they have is, of course, you know, they're sharing vocally their stories, but they are listening. And that's a skill that good storytellers, I believe, have. They're good listeners, because then they can get a better idea of who their audience is, and they can also key into the things that the body language and all of that goes along with that, to have a better understanding, and to share what they're trying to share about a concept or an idea. And what's exciting, I think, about storytelling today is that stories can be told in such a variety of ways. And and everybody keeps telling me, embrace the technology, Jace. And that's and especially, use your phone. You can use your phone for recording and for taking pictures. And I use it to text and answer and talk, orally. But you can use it for other stuff too. But so stories are really really important, I think, because the importance of the power of the word. The power of the word, words can be used to hold people up, or you can use your words to hold people down or to put people down. And a good storyteller will hold people up and encourage people and have people feel good about themselves and want to be a part of what you're trying to get across, and we'll feel like it's a community of people. They'll share with one another, and they feel good about being with one another. So words are very powerful. My grandmother, Scholastica Madbear, was her maiden name, and Cadet was her married name. But Grandma Scholastica, or my grandmother Scholastica, used to say that you should always try to give a good word or share a good something, a good memory, a good word to a good story, something good to someone every day. So think about what you're saying, those words that come out of your mouth. Be careful what you say, because they can make things happen, and they can you put them out in the universe, those words, and they can make things that are real positive, and things that you put out there will come back to you. So remember that. So when you're putting good words out into the universe, good actions and feelings will come back to you. And so I never did hear her say a bad word about anything or anybody, or she was always real uplifting and encouraging to folks. And that's really good when you have a grandmother that is listening to you and encouraging you and talking back and telling you stories about why it's important to do the things that you do as a young person, and teaching us lessons about how to live our lives in a better way. And I was just thinking about this when I was looking at a book that was written by a really important person in my life, important friend, a more recent actually friend, but known him for several years. But he wrote a book called Gather, and his name is Richard Van Camp, and he lives in Saskatchewan, and in the Northwest Territory, up in the Northwest area up there, from Fort Smith. That's where he's originally from. But he's a storyteller. He's probably one of the best storytellers that I've heard, and I love listening to his stories. And I want to talk a little bit more about some of the chapters in his book, but it's he has some really good ideas about why storytelling is important, and gives hints as to how we can be better storytelling tellers. So for the Lakota people, and let me say one more thing about my grandma. One of the lessons that she told us, and the reason why I brought up Richard so soon is because I was kind of going over his book again and looking at some of the hints that he had, and he was telling a story about when he was visiting with his mother about residential schools, boarding schools, and when I was reading that story again about that interaction with his mother, it made me think of my grandmother and the stories, and my mother as well, but the stories that they used to tell, and that was, it made me, the memory was really, really keen and really sharp when my grandmother would tell us, now as it gets dark, you little ones have to come back now. You have to be in the yard as it's getting dusk, and then you have to be in the house when it's dark. And that was one of the things that she encouraged us and actually required us to be home by then. And so when it was starting to get dark, we'd be wandering around Wakapala, or if we were out in the country, we were wandering around down by the river or someplace in the garden or whatever. And we'd start to get dark, and we'd start to inch our way back to close so that we could get into the house before it got completely dark. But she taught us that before you go into the house, she said, one of the things that you have to do is you have to say your name 4 times. And so as little kids, we thought, well, all right. And so I'll be standing out there hollering our names out 4 times. And so then we'd go in the house. And finally, as I was getting older, I would ask her, why did we have to, say our name before we would just do it because grandma told us to, but then you start asking questions about why you do those things. And so she explained to us that when you leave a particular thing that you're doing, whether it's an activity, playing, in this instance it was playing, or when you're leaving a particular ceremony or a particular place like Sundance grounds, or if you've gone to Sweat Lodge someplace, or if you visit a sacred place like a sacred site like Bear Butte or Black Elk Peak or Matotipila, wherever you go in the universe, if you prayed there and you played and prayed, if you will, and you've had an experience in that place, then you tell the spirits your name, and then you bring your spirit, your whole spirit, back with you into your place where you're going to sleep or rest. And so you don't leave part of yourself out there or at that place, because you want to be whole wherever you're going from, whatever location you've been at. And so as a young child, just calling my name out 4 times, to being an adult, still doing that, coming from Bear Butte recently, for example, saying your Lakota name, in this instance, if you have one, saying it 4 times and asking your spirit, please be with me, because you need your whole spirit with you. You need to be there physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally, and not just physically. You need all of those parts of yourself. And so that's what I was, for me, that's truth in storytelling. And that's what my grandmother was trying to teach us, the different truths about why you do things and why they're important. And of course there were other things too, like you don't whistle at night, and you don't look out, peer out windows, through the windows at night. And there's all kinds of do's and don'ts that she taught us about proper behavior, proper protocol, and all that. But I think that's why it's important that we utilize our stories in a good way to tell our truth, to have people know more about who we are and what's important to us. And Lakota, Dakota, whatever people you are, Dene, whatever tribal group, indigenous group that you're from, First Nations group you're from, to be able to share that truth about yourself and about your people and about your ways, your culture, your beliefs. So as Lakota people, we have all different kinds of stories in which we share who we are and our culture. We have creation stories, and those are really the genesis of the oral tradition, how we came to be, how the planet came to be, how Earth came to be, how we, the sun, the moon, all those things. And then we have different stories like fairy tales, humor stories, ikotomi stories, lesson stories of how not to be. In other words, if you do this, you're going to get caught up by, things that the trickster that'll have you do things that you can learn from, and what you shouldn't do. So they teach morals and lessons, proper behavior, those kinds of things. We also have stories that are history stories, like the growth of the oral tradition, like the use of winter counts and ledger art to augment those stories. And the philosophy stories, those stories that tell the wisdom of the oral tradition, those stories that give us advice, the accounts of dreams, those stories are really powerful. And those can be either account verbally, you can share that in a story, or you can share it through paintings, through drawings, and the accounts of deeds, as we see in our ledger art and things of that nature. So our stories are, like I said, are very powerful. They can be accompanied with songs, singing, drums, rattles, whistles, clapping, and other cultures, they use talking sticks. They use, sometimes I've seen storytellers pass a feather around, like when we do our story circle, our storytelling and sharing in that way. And so stories can be accompanied by not only the voice, but also by other things that can augment or make those stories stronger, or those ideas that you're trying to communicate with other folks. Most of my communication has been through the written word, orally, certainly in lectures and in talks and so forth, but through the written word and articles, newsprint, those kinds of things. But that's why I think maybe a lot of my younger constituents, my younger friends, are telling me to embrace technology and get involved in film and media and all those kinds of things. So I'm trying to do that. But the main thing is I think storytelling and stories are very important, and I'm excited to be a part of that. And I would welcome any other comments or questions that you might have, Minnie, right now. I'll stop for now. I talked a lot already.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate your framing that you're not a storyteller, but I think stories are a big part of who we are as Lakota people. So I really appreciate that, because I think we all tell our stories in our own way. But I also would welcome if there's anyone in our audience, either here in the Zoom audience or on Facebook, that has questions. We'd be happy to take them and share them with Jace. So if there's anyone in Zoom, you can raise your hand, or if you'd like to unmute yourself to ask a question, please do so.
I even have my teeth in tonight. I don't have my mask on. I put my teeth in for all of you.
Oh, we have a question from the audience.
Okay. Who is it? Gabe? Gabriel? Yeah. Okay.
Hi. My name's Gabriel Yellowhawk. Right now I'm dealing with storytelling in my work. I'm a park ranger for a Pipestone National Monument, but I'm on a work detail right now at a Wind Cave. And my job, or my mission at the moment right now, is to get more native representation at the monument, or at the park. One of the questions I'm dealing with right now is, I'm sorry, my internet might be a little bad, but is the story of Wind Cave. And if there's no native representation, I think there should be native representation in Wind Cave, but should non-Indigenous people be able to tell our story, or is it more important that there's
Native people selling it?
Maybe I think we lost him for a second.
Yeah, he looks real stiff. Good old technology. See what I mean?
I know. But maybe you could start. So what I got was, what should non-Indigenous people be able to tell our story? And maybe just build off of that question, thinking about Wind Cave.
Okay. Well, I know that I looked at the Wind Cave website, and I know that it has Estes. What's his first name? That's horrible. Wilmer Estes is I'm really bad at names, so
Yeah, Wilmer Mesteth. Yeah.
Wilmer Mesteth told a story about the origin story, our people coming out of Wind Cave, and he did a nice rendition of that, and they did have that on their website, and they had it on you know, that somebody was narrating it. I think they had a Lakota woman narrating it, but so it's on there on their website. And I know that they have non-native park interpreters that tell stories, that have the ability to that's what part of their job is, to share that story with their. And when I first started teaching it, I'll give you a little history here. When I first started teaching at Black Hill State, that was back in 1984, I had some students that were non-native students that were, in the summertime, they would work as interpreters at Wind Cave. And so I encouraged them. I said, you know, that would be really nice if you told our story, of our emergent story of coming out of Wind Cave. So I think it's appropriate if non-natives tell it, but if they tell it in a good way and not like in a like, oh, this is what natives believe, and if, you know, their body language is not, they're not being truthful, or they're not being genuine when they're telling it, then it's better if they don't tell it. Then, you know, they have to really embrace it or understand that this is how this group of people believes, and so they're sharing something that's very sacred about our belief system. And so it's our genesis again of how we came to be. And so I think if they are very genuine, if they're authentic, if their heart's in a good place, I think non-natives can do it. But they have to really, I'm not saying they have to believe that, but if they're sharing that with a bigger public, they have to be convincing, I guess, that you know, this is the way that these people believe, and it's not for us to judge. I mean, they don't say that to the people, certainly the public, but it's not a judgmental thing, but it's a sharing, so that they can have a better understanding of our thought process and how we believe that, you know, in our oral tradition, this is what came to be. So I think if it comes from native interpreters, that's wonderful. You know, that's great if they have native interpreters working there, but oftentimes they don't have native, they would have non-native as well. So, but I think the story is the important thing, that it should be shared. But like I said, when I first started talking to these young people that would work in the summertime, summer jobs, at that time, they were discouraging those interpreters from sharing the Lakota story, which I thought was very sad. But now they are encouraging them to do that, to tell the story. But again, to be careful when you tell other folks' stories, you know, be very respectful of that. And I think people can be, but they have to work at it. They can't be just standing there sounding like they don't believe in what they're saying. You know what I mean? Does that make sense, folks?
I do. Yeah, I actually took a friend to Wind Cave this past summer, and it was a non-native ranger that was leading the tour through And in the beginning, right, they have that wonderful material about our emergence and that Wilmer and I think it was Sheena Bear Eagle
Yeah.
you created and for the park. And then but it was kind of dismissive, like the ranger nodded to it and then was like, but, kind of just rushed over it. And I was very frustrated, but I was like, okay, I'm not going to cause a scene at the national park. But I do think there is such an opportunity. And thank you, Gabriel, for posing that question. I think it is a conversation we need to have, especially as these national parks and these local parks are part of our homeland. So we have a question from Facebook. Jennifer Eastman says, Ha Madakiapi, I teach high school Lakota studies, and I'm wondering if you have any curriculum for storytelling.
I do have some like handouts and that I have. I could mail things to people, or if I could have access to things to share with the curriculum material. I have lots of stuff and all the things that I've kept on all my classes, and including the storytelling stuff that I have, like the oral tradition and my rendition of how the Lakota came to be and all that. I could send that information to folks if they would. I could email it to them, for example. Probably I should. Minnie maybe can put my email on the chat, and folks could request that of me if they really. And I could send what I have. Some stuff I'd have to scan in and have somebody help me at the. But we have a young lady, Tiara Little, that is working with us we got a national endowment here for the humanities grant to interview Black Hill State. The Center for American Indian Studies received that. So Tiara has been working with us on that and it's directed really with storytelling and how we and we're going to be interviewing 5 elders from the region, and we have John and his brother Ken that are going to be doing the documentary, putting it together, editing it, putting it together. And so but I'll be doing a lot of the interviewing, as well as some of the interns that are working with us that are students at Black Hill State. But so we do have some documents, and Tiara has been helping me put some things down for our so that we can have it documented. And so I can get some things in that way too that I can send folks, because that's I think it's important. I think storytelling is really important. So I'll share what I have.
Awesome, thank you. That's really exciting about the work with Tiara and John and his brother. I'm looking forward to seeing that material.
Yeah.
So there's a question in the chat from Chad. I say Chi. I am from the nation of Taiwan, and there are currently 16 indigenous nations in Taiwan who've been here since time immemorial. My question is, do you think or believe that there is merit in facilitating teacher-educator exchange between the indigenous nations? So between the nation, right, I would say the indigenous nations and the nation state, which would be Taiwan, or like how we have these teacher-educator relationships with like US and Canada or New Zealand. So maybe if you could just speak about our teacher educational exchanges as Indigenous people with federal forces.
Well, I think that, anytime that you have different groups of people, different tribal nations or indigenous nations from different countries, anything that encourages interaction and communication between sharing information between groups of people like that, in this instance, teachers. I think it's really a positive thing that makes our world is so small now. Like somebody can be sitting in here watching this and from another country, Australia or Taiwan or any other place, and so because of Zoom and because of the interaction through the internet, the communication of these presentations and all that, we are doing that. Aren't we doing that right now? I mean, if there are educators out there, that's what we're doing. Now, if we're talking about physically moving and exchanging faculty, there's all kinds of ways of how this exchange can be. We can exchange information, we can exchange curriculum like we were just talking about, or we can actually physically exchange faculty from different institutions, or we can share information like we're doing now. So there's all different kinds of ways to do that. And I encourage that, because when I was a younger educator in my early years, when I first got out of undergraduate work, I started teaching when I was, how old was I? I was 21 years old. I started teaching in a tribal college when I was 21 years old, and everyone except for one young man was 1 year old younger than me, and everyone else in the classes were older than me. So those elders really taught me a lot. That's why I always give tribute to them as our knowledge keepers and our wisdom keepers, because they taught me a lot in my first year of teaching at Turtle Mountain Community College. And I really acknowledge those Chippewa, those Turtle Mountain people there for and I'm thankful for their knowledge that they shared with me. And I, so I learned a lot. But I was physically there. I was from a different tribe, but I was encouraged to by a colleague of mine who I went to school with at the University of North Dakota, and she got me involved in her tribal people and teaching there. She actually tricked me in a little way. She Twyla Martin Kikaba is her name. Twyla said, "Come on, I need some help in developing curriculum for tribal college. We're trying to start at Turtle Mountain, and I want you to come and help me write syllabus and get resources and curriculum and so forth together." And I said, "I can do that," because I'd been doing that in my summertime while I was going to college still. So I love doing research and all that. So I was doing that anyway. So I said, "Sure, I'll come up there and help." So, so I did that after I graduated in May, and I did that in the month of June and July, and we were working on that curriculum, and that was fun. And then she said, now that you've done all this, we're going to have you teach the classes starting this fall. And I looked at her like she was nuts. I said, I don't think so. I'll help you with the curriculum, but I'm not going to teach. She said, I think you can do it. I think you can. You know the material, you put it together, you know what to do. And so I said, I have to pray about it. So I at that time I was going to what they call the International Sundance at Greengrass on the Cheyenne River Reservation. So that was in the summer of 1973. I decided, and I prayed there and asked the Creator, and asked all of creation, Taku Wakanki, that which is holy, is this the path that I should undertake this, with these people and with this job? And I prayed about it, and I put, gave the offerings, food and tobacco, water, and asked for help. Prayed at Bear Butte, and then prayed at Greengrass, and was given the answer to do what you can, to try, just do the best you can and try. So I did, and it really put me on a different path that I was thankful for. It put me on a good path, of education and formal education, and also but realizing that that's where I can find the strength to do things in the traditional Lakota ways, in the traditional teachings. And so that's what I want to try to continue to share with other folks. And that's what will be the strength and will help us be good Lakota people. I think if we really keep out those wonspe, those teachings that we, our people have been doing for generations and generations, since time immemorial, since Wind Cave.
Thank you. So we had a couple, just for those that are on Facebook, I wanted to share out some comments in the Zoom chat. So just Gracie is sharing, there's no guarantee that non-natives will share stories in an authentic or non-dismissive way during the tours. It would be good to have a video of our own people sharing the story of Wind Cave, or making sure there's cultural sensitivity training taking place so that all our tour guides are able to present our stories respectfully and authentically. I completely agree with that. And it would be really great actually for the project you shared, Jace, like once John and his brother are done with the video, like that could be used in so many places.
Yeah.
And then
they wouldn't have to use the whole, documentary, however long that is going to be. But if there's something that's related to Wind Cave or, whatever would fit within that particular park system or whatever, that would certainly, those are kinds of things that we would encourage people to do. And it's ideally, it's great if we have our own people are telling those in our, in videos and clips. But what happens when you don't have people applying for those jobs? And somebody, we can't force Lakota people to go in there and be, interpreters. And if there are folks that are wanting to be there to share our story in a good way, then we should encourage that as well. So
I would love more in park rangers that are Lakota. There's a question from on Facebook from Whitney Rencounter. He asks, how did Black Hills State establish American Indian Studies as a major? Who was instrumental in helping establish the program? And then who is your favorite elder to interview over the years?
Okay. Man, that sounds like a whole history lesson right there about Black Hills State. I came in kind of in the 1970s, the Center for American Indian Studies was established through, actually, there were two centers that were established through legislative mandate. The Black Hills State University was going to have one, and the other center would be at the University of South Dakota. And so at Black Hills State, they immediately took that charge, to heart. And there were different folks there that were early educators. Gerald One Feather and Vivian One Feather were there. Lowell Amiot, Ray Howe. Let's see who else. And then Barine, I think Barine Cedarface White was there for Lakota language. And then there were I'm certainly leaving people out here, but and when they established the center, then they applied for grants. At that time, the grants were a little bit easier to get, it seems to be, but now they're really hard to get, often from the federal government. But anyway, they got Title VII, I think it was 7 language grants, in which they thought, I think they were really farsighted, because they understood that keeping the language alive and starting from that base would really help the curriculum, and things would spinball from that. And that's when they started developing their handbooks on the curriculum, tribal government, and there's a whole bunch of different ones that were put together by a number of educators that were associated with the center at that time. There's even one on Washkate on games. And, some of that stuff is, is priceless because they did interviews orally of different elders to put those things together. So that was exciting. And then as time progressed, then they started, and the same time they started developing courses that could be taught to introduce American Indian Studies into the curriculum at Black Hill State. And so Lakota thought and philosophy, and American Indian history and culture 1 and 2, and different classes that would tell our story. And then it came to be that the state mandated that there will be a class that all teachers had to take, which is called South Dakota Indian Studies at Black Hill State. But at that time, when I taught it at Black Hills many years ago, it was called Education of the Culturally Different. But that course is taught at all the 6 regental institutions, a course that future teachers have to take. And so it depends on what institution they're at, whatever that course is. Like I said, at BH is South Dakota Indian Studies. But in the meantime, in terms of history, how it further developed is they were able to get further staff by working cooperatively with as receiving funding that it was called Title III funding from the federal government, in which they could develop further activities and courses and so forth at Black Hill State, but as well as helping 2 other institutions develop their curriculum. And those other 2 institutions at that time were not colleges yet, but they were on the Pine Ridge Reservation of Oglala Lakota College, which will eventually be that, and Sinteglashka classes there, which would eventually be SDU, Sinteglashka University. But at that time, they were developing institutions in association with Black Hill State. And so between faculty members, and that's what happened there, we were talking about faculty cooperation, people that were on the reservations and folks that worked at Black Hill State then put together classes that could be taught at VH and as well as those two reservations. Well, eventually those other 2 became their own universities. But Black Hill State has started becoming and being thought as the regional American Indian Studies program that was forming a strong discipline in the area. So when I first started teaching there, my gosh, I was teaching all different kinds of classes. I even taught an Indian law class once, which was really a stretch for me. And I had to do a lot of research before I taught that. But the idea of people working together cooperatively to try to make the story, again, going back to storytelling, bring that story together and educating with the mind that we're going to be educating future generations of people, not just the here and now, but we're doing this for the future people that will be going to BH and also acknowledging those folks that have that knowledge so that we can keep it alive and well. Does that answer kind of?
Yeah,
I forget the second question. That was about the history of the center and
yeah. And then who is your favorite elder to interview over the years?
Over the years, probably the one that I liked to talk with was Jay Taken Alive. In fact, I really miss visiting with him. And I didn't think of it as an interview at the time, but that's what it was. But he was sharing lots of information that was wonderful knowledge. And I still have many of those teachings that I share with other folks. And another person that I enjoyed interviewing and visiting with is a mashke of mine, Faith Spotted Eagle. She's a wonderful storyteller too. I enjoyed visiting with her. And of course, Mary Louise, Defender, from one of my aunties. And another lady, Therese Martin, was an auntie of mine that had died at 103 years old. I really enjoyed interviewing her and visiting with her and sharing her knowledge. Oh, there's so many. I really liked, oh, what's his name now? They're really bad at names. Now you're asking me to recall names. The fellow that wrote the book Zuya. God. Why Albert Whitehat. Albert Whitehat. Yeah, I really enjoyed. In fact, I had help Albert come into my classes and talk, as well as Jay and Therese and a bunch of different elders came into my classes to talk and share their words. But Albert was really fun to listen to. He was a wonderful storyteller, and his nephew Dwayne Hullahorn Bear is also a wonderful person to interview and talk with. He has a lot of wonderful knowledge as well. There's lots. There's, in fact, that's been I think one of the most difficult things of trying to narrow it down just to a few elders for this documentary, because there are so many. Oh my gosh, so, but isn't that exciting that there are so many to have to do that? I see it. Is there?
Yeah, so I was just gonna add some, and I'm really excited about this documentary, and also thank you for sharing all those names as you remembered them, especially on the spot. My memories, I'm much younger. My memory's still not that great. Do and Nancy both shared in the chat just about like wishes and needs and how to get involved. So I just briefly shared about the South Dakota Native Tourism Alliance. So those that might want to be a part of these conversations of how we share out these stories and be in collaboration with Native tourism in South Dakota, write our stories. And I know South Dakota makes a large part of its economy in the tourist season in the summer. So she shared out the Tourism Alliance. And then Nancy also shared that she's from White River Valley, Sioux County in Nebraska, and it remains her dream that Indigenous people will fully staff state and federal parks, which I think would be so exciting to do and to have. And so just thinking about those conversations, Whitney followed up just with a bunch of hearts and said, "Love you, Mato Ina." So giving you shouts out on Facebook, and folks are just saying thanks more. Thank you for your knowledge, sharing out your beautiful explanations, to the dedication of your calling. And so I really appreciate these conversations and the work that you've done to continue telling these stories in different spaces. I think teaching is also storytelling. So thank you, Jace.
You're welcome. And not only teaching, but also acknowledging those storytellers. We really have to acknowledge them and not let people take them for granted. See, that's the thing, we think that they're always going to be here, that, oh, I'll just contact them, I'll call them, or I'll send them an email. And, none of us are going to live forever. And I think that's, we have to really treasure those storytellers so that we don't take them for granted, and know that their knowledge is really, really a blessing. And remember that. I'm also reminded of our spiritual leaders and our medicine men and holy men and medicine women and holy women that are connected to the land and connected to the plants and the animal life and all those things, that are part of our universe, that are just as important to us as human beings are to us. And that all that knowledge is what they share in their stories as well. it's so exciting to hear Native elders talk about singing to the plants and singing special songs to the plants as the plants understand and respond by growing and helping us to heal, and that's and foods and so when I was putting my little outline together to talk about this, I was thinking, oh my gosh, there's so many things that you can talk about when you're talking about storytelling examples. You know, we can you know, there are a lot of stories associated about collective thought, governance, responsibility. I remember Rosalie Little Thunder. I love to hear her stories about collective, how the collective is more important, the group is more important than an individual, and how we have a responsibility to take care of one another and to work together, to cooperate with one another. And her work was really with the buffalo and how important the buffalo was and is to our people, how we're connected to the Pteoyate, the Tatanka, and those things that help us to understand where we came from, our philosophy, our traditional values, our living in harmony with the universe around us. And so those culture bearers, those teachers really have a lot of information that I think is just precious, that we really need to acknowledge and understand and share that history. I had a question here. What does it mean to decolonize history from an Indigenous perspective? You know, asking the right questions and trying to come up with the right answers and share our information in a good way. Decolonize, sharing traditional ways of being and knowing, using our own languages. I know Bev Running Bear and her group out of Rapid City is really working to get the language really strong again, and in our schools and in our families, and I think that's part of who we are. We can't, you know, we have to really keep that language strong. That's a real big part of decolonization. The handout that I gave Minnie was, I don't know, it was about 5 pages or so. That now, if you were in the classroom and you were all sitting in front of me, I would have these copies, hard copies for you to hand out so that you could look at it and have access to it. I think when I taught at Black Hills State, I was known as the copy queen of the university because, and my sons are always teasing me about using too much paper. So we don't do that anymore, Mom, wasting trees and whatnot. So, but you know, I'm old school in that way. I have to see things in front of my face. But these stories from Indigenous people, they're all different places that you can get them, the resources, examples from. I always tell people to go to the National Museum of the American Indian. They in Washington, D.C. They have a wonderful website now that has all different kinds of examples of art, storytelling through art, and I don't know if you can put that up. That gosh, I put the art about the Eastern Band of Cherokee late artist Sean Goshorn. Can you put that up or no? Or do we want to?
Yeah, I can share.
Okay.
And I'll find the Shan's work.
There's her art. Yeah. She did baskets, and she taught herself learned how to do baskets. And what she did was her groundbreaking piece, Resisting the Mission, Filling the Silence, features intricate and exquisite woven baskets. And she tells the story of the dark past, children's forced to be, that went into assimilation at Carlisle boarding school. in the 20th and the turn of the 20th century. And she talks, you know, she uses Cherokee weaving to honor children that went to Carlisle. And that really touched me because my grandparents, both my grandmother Scholastica I mentioned, and my grandfather Jerome Cadet, they both went to Carlisle at boarding school. And so when I saw this on the website, I thought, oh, what a way of honoring those Native children who were taken from their families and putting those in baskets. What, you know, telling their story in that way, you know, their image and honoring them in that way. I thought that was just an amazing thing to do. And the before and after photographs, we've all seen those on maybe in portraits and so forth in books, but she had a way of putting those into baskets, and they're beautiful, but they're also very powerful and also very sad, you know, to see the before and then the after, but impacting and insight, you know, into the pain, the cruelty, all those things, those emotions that come up. And I think that was her way of, through art, of telling the story of those our relatives who went through that pain and lost their identity and had to deal with this new world in which they were killing the Indians and saving the man. That was a hard time for our people. And with, you know, great detail, she told that story in a beautiful way. That sad story, that horrible, horrific story in a beautiful way. And so that's incredible. I think it shows an incredible way of resilience and perseverance of Native people and our culture. And so, you know, there were so many different ways to tell our story. We can tell our story in the culinary arts. You know, a lot of people, Sean Sherman and other Lakota chefs are doing that by reminding us that our indigenous food systems are really important for the health and welfare of our people. And I understand that there is going to be a food summit coming up in February. I think it's at the Holiday Inn in Rapid City. Have you heard of that, Minnie?
I haven't yet, but I'll look into it.
Yeah, I think Sean was talking about having, I think they're trying to have a face-to-face one, which they weren't able to do last year because of the pandemic, but I believe they're trying to do it this year in February. But telling those stories about, you know, how important it is for us to eat our tradition, our indigenous foods, our natural foods and plants, and utilizing those for our healing and for, I know that every summer we collect, well, in the spring we collect chashasha, or soon, anytime now, for our red willow or our red osier dogwood for our tobacco. But we also collect, you know, our wakafewash demina and our teaka and so forth, you know, for our medicines and also for our stomach aches and things like that. So those traditional foods and medicines, I'm so happy that our people are knowing the stories behind them and sharing those stories and healing people. And so that sharing stories in the culinary arts and the healing arts, I think are another wonderful way of telling stories. And even in other areas, indigenous fashion, adornment, jewelry, cultural symbolism, you know, there's all kinds of stories. That there's a book that was written, The Power of Style, by Ojibwe author Christian Allaire. And those stories and from Cultural Survival, another web or another newsletter I get on the web, decolonizing fashion, one runway at a time. That was in September of 2021 by the Dene author Nia de Groot. So, you know, people are telling their stories and all the music and dance and storytelling. We all know of our Dallas Chief Eagle, and who's the other hoop dancer? I know Jackie Bird was. I don't know if she hoop dances anymore though. She's older. She sings now, I think, still. Oh, what's the other folk? The guy that's from Wakwala. I should know him. Kevin Locke. Kevin Locke is another hoop dancer. He tells stories when he's doing his hoop dancing. There are, if you go to the PBS website in South Dakota, they have games for reading and storytelling, you know, that you can access those resources for kids pre to 3 and different ages, interactive games. Telling your story through photography, film, social media, storytelling in that way. Photography, I think it was a wonderful way. Jessie Raincounter, which is the wife of Whitney Raincounter, she's a wonderful photographer, and she tells wonderful stories through her photographs. So there are all different kinds of ways. Movies, films, that's what we're trying to do in our documentary. I'm just doing the interviewing and talking and contacting the elders, but Ken and, like you mentioned, Ken and what's his name? John. Ken and John will be the ones that'll be actually doing the editing and all that. I should remember John. John was a student of mine at Black Hill State way back when, and then he went on to USD and then the University of Minnesota. I think that, and so, but
yeah, John and his partner Megan will be presenting this weekend. I think
I know
Sunday.
I saw that. That's wonderful. Yeah, they're wonderful young people. They're doing some good work in education. So in virtual reality, you know, where they put those headsets on and they, you know, virtual reality, VR can bring the audience closer to the storytellers. Now that's, I haven't even put one of those things on my head, but my grandkids love that. They love doing games and stuff with that. But I guess the reason why I added that on is because I was looking at the Sundance website, and they had virtual reality films that they were showcasing, made by native filmmakers. So I thought that was kind of exciting way. That's for other folks to do, but I think that's exciting. And then also by sharing this historical, social, cultural stories in a truthful, respectful way. I was involved in an article that came out in Education Week in the social studies area, and it was called Revising America's Racist Past. And so we can talk about some of those harder social issues in storytelling as well today, those contemporary issues that are in that particular article by Stephen Sawchuk. It came out January 18th, actually, just a few days ago. It's a reference to the current issues in South Dakota, the revision of the history and social studies curriculum that folks were, oh, I love you. Little guy's kissing us. Takoja. Oh, another one. Hi, Takojas. I love you. And so those issues that, you know, when they were talking about critical race theory and then revising the curriculum, then they got it done and then they threw it out and they started all over. And so, you know, those kinds of things have been really discouraging, but that's part of storytelling. That's educating. When I was interviewed by Stephen Sawchuk, that was the author of that article, you know, I was educating him about what Oceti Sakowin is. I sent him a handout that talked about the L, D, and the N people, so they have a better understanding of that. And so that, you know, it never, I think it's really important that you can't do everything, so you have to find the niche that you best fit in storytelling, and go with it. And it's exciting, I think, if you find that area that you love to do, whether it be film or art, music, whatever. And I know what we're getting further in time here, but are we out of time? Actually, are we done?
We can go if you have some final closing thoughts.
Final, the final stuff. I can go on and on and on here.
Yeah.
You're a professor, you can teach
I
forever.
could keep listening.
Well, there's a book and everything's opposite when you look at this, right? But this book
I think it looks opposite to you, but we can see it.
Our History is the Future by Nick Estes, up and coming, really wonderful historian. I think he's at the University of Minnesota now. But anyway, that is the one book South Dakota this year in 2022. And folks all throughout the state of South Dakota, and probably other places too, will be reading that book, and we'll be talking about the stories that Nick has in his book, dealing with sovereignty, the protest, actually the water protection camps that were at Standing Rock is in there, and environmental racism. Those are some of the issues that are talked about in that book. So another book that I'm excited about, that I'm glad it got an award, a youth award, a literature award in 2022, is Diane Wilson's book about Ella Cara Deloria. And so that was exciting to read. I know that at some point, Jesse Reencounter will also have, I believe, one of the books that'll get an award someday, because she's been doing some children's books too that are really good, telling the story that way for young people. So lots of exciting stuff going on in storytelling. It's not just getting up in front of a group and telling stories now. There are all kinds of ways to do it. But I think the main thing is keeping an open mind and sharing the words with people, and interacting, and turning the TV off and turning the cell phones off for a while, and encouraging one another to speak to one another again and listen to one another.
Thank you, Jace. I really appreciate that encouragement. I think especially as we're, coming past our 2-year mark for being in the pandemic, I think a lot of people are really looking for ways to connect, and it's a good reminder that we should just talk to each other. And so I just, there's some affirmations on Facebook, just folks. Sean Dubb says, watching from the Wakba Washday. George Badaloon is saying art is life, and just giving you more affirmation. People are, Christiane said hello to my favorite teacher. Lacey Loken said, Jace has been a blessing to many of us former BHSU students. The love, wisdom, and teaching, understanding, and immeasurable impact. So people are just saying thank you and really appreciating your presentation today. So, and thank you again. I really appreciate it. Any final goodbyes or stoksha akes?
I would just, people can, I would just encourage people to go directly to the land, to our sacred sites, and sit on the land, and wonderful stories will come to you too, if you just listen and get connected to these sacred spaces. That and you can be the one that comes with a new story from Mother Earth. I encourage that, especially these young kids that they need to be connected to those sacred spaces. I'm glad to have spent the time, folks. How do we protect those sacred sites? Oh my gosh, that's a whole nother video, a whole nother Zoom talk.
Yeah, that would be it. That maybe that could be our next one of
Yeah,
our next conversations.
That's a wonderful topic. And I think that would be exciting for somebody to come in there and have a panel on that one.
Yeah, that is a really good, we'll have to come up with some folks that could talk
Mhm.
about both aspects of, I think, of our ritual space as well as law and policy, right? We sometimes have to utilize federal law to
Mhm.
be able to do those things. So
Mhm.
thank you for those closing questions. And I think I'm going to stop the Facebook Live. So thank you all for joining us on Facebook Live. We really appreciate having both of those options. And then just thank you, Jace, and those who joined us in the Zoom room. And like I said, we have presentations coming up this weekend with John and Megan. And then those of you who would like conversations about national parks, we have Sheena Bear Eagle, who is Oglala Lakota, and she was a former park ranger at Wind Caves. So she'll be sharing out about her experiences as a current park ranger in New York. So
Wow.
I think we'll have those conversations as well. So thank you all for joining us, and I hope you all have a good day. Hi.
Hi. See you. No buys, just dokshake. Thank you so much for being part of our discussion. I really enjoyed it. Good night, Minnie. Take care.
Good night. Thank you all.
Bye, folks.